So last week I did a video on all of the places to sell rare books, and a viewer had a brilliant corollary for me to do a video on, and it's probably one I should have thought of myself, but of course, booksellers are either incredibly brilliant or not so brilliant, and since I fall in the latter category, I did not think of it. But the follow-up is, where do I buy all of these rare books? So I'll do this video showing all of the places that I buy rare books. Now, I should say right off the bat that books are everywhere. These are things that have survived the centuries. Yes, a lot have been destroyed by the ravages of time, but they survive in abundance, I can assure you that. And one of the great secrets of the rare book trade is that rare books are not really rare. Now, of course, you can have individually a rare book, but I'm talking about the general category of books. There are a lot of books, so much so that I have a dealer friend who refuses to use the word rare in his descriptions. I think probably because booksellers overuse it. Everything is rare or very rare or excessively rare or rare in commerce or rarer than hen's teeth. I should probably start excluding it myself. I think I'm going to use something like appears less frequently than a purple penguin in Antarctica. I think that sounds good in a bibliographic description. But let's get on to the video and talk about where do I buy all of these rare books. So the first place that I love to buy things is, of course, to be privately offered them. Now, of course, it's not easy to get private offers. This is what every dealer wants, naturally. Now, one way I go about that is I set up a website. I've had myself listed as rarebookbuyer.com for, I don't know, 20 years or something, and people contacted me that way. Of course, I do social media and accounts, and naturally, YouTube as well. One great advantage I have is, of course, I have a place to work from in Manhattan. And I think if you can set yourself up, at least with a small piece of real estate somewhere, whether an office or a small bookshop, that really acts as a source of advertising to get private offers. Now, for the long term in buying private offers, one thing, of course, you want to do is be very, very fair in what you offer people, especially today, with auction records and other places that people can go to books. But I think for your long-term reputation, you certainly want to pay fair prices. And of course, you have to be beholden to your conscience and even Google recommendations, not to underpay for something. But you have a great advantage in buying privately. The reason that every dealer wants to buy privately is that there are no auction records of it. And today it's so transparent to see where somebody bought something or what they paid, that really gives an advantage to people to buy privately, to allow for markups in the purchases that they make. So I will show you first a book that somebody came into here and sold me privately. So here is a lovely little 1648 vellum-bound German book, and it's in the shape of what we call an oblong octavo. Oblong is one of my favorite little shapes. It's really wonderful to hold. And you'll excuse my German here, but it says Gesprächsspiel, or basically a conversation book. And this was written during the High German Baroque era, and it was really a book on, I would say, entertainment in social settings and edification in social settings. And it's filled with some wonderful images here. And we can see in this particular one, the 3 skeletons showing various stages of life, a reminder of death there. And I guess that's more for the edification and not the education in social circles. But there are also some wonderful pastimes and games that people can play, like this gentleman here. He is painting a porcelain swan. So that's such a wonderful book. And this is not a book that I would actively search out. So I love the fact that someone came in here, offered it to me privately, and it's a little bit of that serendipity and romance of buying something that just comes to you that I really love. So a charming book that I bought privately. Secondly is the big fish, auctions. Now, auctions are where most people in our trade buy most of their books. And you have to be a little bit skilled these days to look at the auctions. There's so many of them. I look at all the major platforms. Usually every month I start off on Rare Book Hub, which has a very nice calendar that lists at least, 70, 80% of all of the upcoming auctions. But I look at other sites too online, like liveauctioneers.com. I look at the Sale Room, which shows some of the English auctions. I look at intranchère.com for the French auctions. And I also subscribe to the mailing list of a lot of the auction houses that constantly barrage me with upcoming sales and things to look at. Now, a lot of people gravitate, I think, in auctions to sometimes smaller sales. You think you're going to get a bargain in a relatively unknown sale that, I don't know, is being conducted in a houseboat out of Florida. The problem with those type of auctions, I find, and yes, you can occasionally find bargains, is that everybody these days thinks that way. So these tiny little sales often get bid up to the moon by people thinking they're going to get a bargain, especially inexperienced people. And secondly, you have to rely on the auction house. And many of these small auction houses can be quite unreliable, I assure you, in their descriptions. They don't collate books properly, they don't point out the flaws, and they sort of sell everything as is, which can be a big problem. So my time generally is more spent on what I call the crumbs at the king's table approach, and that is I go to the really big auction houses, those auction houses that I can rely on, that I've dealt with, that I trust their descriptions. And sometimes that material is expensive, Christie's and Sotheby's, for instance, but I look for the crumbs that fall off the king's table and try and scoop some of them up. And I think that really gives an advantage because people don't necessarily go to all the big auctions. They think everything is going to be top price there, so they kind of ignore them and go for the smaller ones. But that isn't always the case, and I've gotten some wonderful buys and bargains at the big houses. So let me show you something I recently bought at auction at one of my favorite auction houses, Swan Galleries in New York, run by the incredibly debonair Nico Lowry, who everybody probably knows from the Antique Roadshow. And this was a collection of broadsides, mostly 16th and 17th century broadsides from the Inquisition. And the reason that I bought this lot is because I think it gives me some advantage in pricing out for what I paid. There's, I think, 20 broadsides in the collection. And I can really add value because the auctioneer is not going to spend time reading every single one of these broadsides. And there's some wonderful ones in here on books that were prohibited during the period, on the index of prohibited books, or other things that went on during the Inquisition. We'll spend a lot of time on reading these and writing up interesting aspects of these rather rare broadsides. So that's directly from an auction house, showing that you can indeed get bargains at. And so another place that I buy books is on eBay, the granddaddy, the great flea market of the world. Now, it's not what it once was, and I rightfully disparaged it in my previous video, but I still find things there. So one of the things I found recently, which I think fell through the cracks, is this 17th century, rather handsomely bound and modeled calf book. It's printed in 1628. And the reason I think I bought it for only $200 is it's on Ovid. People tend to sometimes gloss over the classics. But what's interesting about this particular volume is that it's a translation into Spanish. But it was printed in France, in Bordeaux, in the house of Guillermo Melange. And I found that particularly unusual. Now, why was there Spanish printing in France during the period? Well, in Bordeaux, they had an exile community of merchants and the intelligentsia who congregated there. And I think there was a hub of Iberian printing in France, largely to escape the very strict printing regulations of the Spanish Inquisitions and embrace the more lenient French authorities. And this suddenly becomes not only a Spanish translation of Ovid for me, but a work that really can explain censorship during the period, again to do with the Spanish Inquisition and the French censorship laws, which were much more liberal during the period. Besides that, it's also a wonderful example, I think, of the great golden age of Spanish literature. Don't forget, this is 1628, so we're talking close to the era of Cervantes and people like that. So a wonderful, and I can't say rare book, I promise not to say rare book, but it is a book that is as infrequently encountered as a purple penguin in Antarctica. So that is my eBay find, showing you still can get books on eBay. Other places you can get books, I think, online these days. One place I occasionally scout, of course I run out of time, is to look on sites like ABAA Books, which is the preeminent listing site for used out of print and rare books. And one of the techniques that I use actually is to click on newly listed books. I think a lot of people look there because dealers put up fresh to market material. You could either do keywords and glance through that. And don't forget, dealers can underprice things not in their specialty or make mistakes, and things very quickly disappear from the ABAA books if somebody has made a mistake. Other places I go, one of my favorites, other dealers. And I like to call up other dealers, especially dealers in the ABAA, but of course there are many dealers outside the ABAA, and go and visit them, their offices, their bookshops, talk to them, become friends with them, because of course they have books. And I will show you a book I recently bought from my good friend and colleague at Sanctuary Books, which I found particularly charming, which I would not have found anywhere else. So this is a wonderful little manuscript, and the reason I bought it is because I love everything that's old to do with cats. And you can see it was made, I think, in the 1830s, and it's got some very charming illustrations of cats throughout the book. And it also has one of the most wonderful little book plates I've seen. So that is a wonderful little find, again, purchased from a dealer. Now, you can find lots of dealers, of course, congregate at book fairs. There are book fairs all over the place. There's a new one coming up in Texas, I think, in June, that unfortunately I'm not going to be able to visit, but I do hope a lot of people go out to see that book in Dallas, book fair in Dallas. But they're in California, New York. If you want to travel the world and go to book fairs, they're pretty endless and they're all the time. And book dealers come with lots of material. There's so much to see. And you get to explore books and purchase things that you probably wouldn't have found online or wouldn't have appealed to you or have been interesting. So recently I was at a small book fair and I picked up this little book on moral gallantry, 1685. It's a discourse. And the reason I bought this charming little book is for two reasons. One, it says London, printed by Hannah Sawbridge in 1685. Hannah Sawbridge is, of course, a woman printer of the period. She was the widow of George Sawbridge, if I remember. And women printers of the 17th century become very collectible. So I saw that little detail on a book on a shelf, had gone unnoticed at a book fair, and I grabbed it. It's also, I think, really intriguing, at least to me, and something I haven't explored, why it says printed for Hannah Sawbridge and not, as in some books, the widow of, say, George Sawbridge, or women of the period often used the widow of, whereas some people dispense with that. And I wanted to explore sometimes why they used that and why they didn't. Another reason I bought it was because I'm actually reading the books or leafing through them at a book fair, and that's certainly impossible on sites online or at auctions online. And some of the titles of the chapters in this book are so wonderful that it immediately appealed to me. It says, "A consolation against calumnies, showing how to bear them easily and pleasantly." So when anybody talks smack about you, you need this consolation against calumnies. So it just had a lot of charm, and I grabbed that at the book fair. Other places you can look for books. I encouraged people last time to look at the ListServ on Ex-Libris, which is run by the University of Indiana, I think, hosted now. And every Tuesday is Catalog Tuesday. They allow commercial listings. Now, in my last video, I said that's a wonderful place to sell books. And any place where you're selling books, of course, it's an opportunity to buy books. So as soon as Tuesday hits, all of the catalogs start coming out on Ex-Libris. And you try and look at as many as possible. It can be completely overwhelming. Sometimes there's hundreds of them to glance through, but you do get to know your favorite dealers, and it's often fresh to market material you get to see for the first time, and that's a really wonderful place to grab something that's interesting and unusual and hasn't been offered before. So do check that out. I also, of course, love institutions. If institutions these days, for whatever reason, they have too many books or difficulty processing them or other budgetary issues, I think there's going to be a lot of deaccessioning. And sometimes an institution has to dispense or sell their library, and you hope that you get called into one of these situations. But that is also another reason to work with other booksellers and colleagues and buy from them and sell to them, because you develop all of these friendships and connections and networks. And then when somebody hears about a major library coming onto the market, which is sometimes even overwhelming for one bookseller to handle, they invite you in to work with some of those books. And that's a really great opportunity to buy stuff that's never been on the market before or hasn't been on for a long time, and oftentimes at reasonable prices, because they have to sell the material and because you want to help them recirculate the material into appreciative hands, private collectors, and other institutions. So buying from institutions is really a great source. I would say also pickers come to me. Now, pickers are going to estate sales and they're going to thrift stores. And again, it's like buying privately. You get your picker network over the years and you try and make friends with people. And certainly they can bring you some interesting things to look at. So I try and encourage anybody. And you want to develop these relationships and be really fair with people. And if something sells well, you might even kick them back some extra money, because the next time they're at a flea market in Los Angeles or something and they find something, you want to be the person that's on the top of their mind to call. Outside of that, of course, you also want to go to other dealers who aren't necessarily book dealers. I'm in the Manhattan Antique Center here, and it's filled with art dealers and coin dealers. And there's all sorts of shows. Sometimes I attend the Waldorf, maybe not at the Waldorf anymore, where they have the numismatic convention. But you meet dealers there who are not necessarily in the book trade, but do go into houses, find estates, come upon books. And again, you want to be the person who's on the top of their mind. And they even sometimes bring things for sale which are not exactly in their areas of expertise. And, you can find some interesting items that way. And finally, of course, one of my favorite things, and this is going back to hunting in bookshops, is when I used to travel. I think I started this in my early 20s. Anywhere that I went in the world, I would try and pay for my trip by finding books in bookshops. And whether I went to South Africa or if I went to France, that was my goal. I knew my expenses and I went around all the bookshops, and if I could pay for my hotel and my travel, I was absolutely delighted. Now, that's become more difficult, I think, because the books aren't as plentiful as they once were. And of course, prices for travel have gone up through the moon. Although I recently tested my skills because I was in Japan a couple months ago, and I did go around all of the bookshops in the district in Tokyo, and I bought some unusual material, at least for me. Now, I did not recoup all of my expenses, but it wasn't a total failure. I would say this time I got back about half of the cost of everything, but still, I'm enjoying Japan. So that's an incentive to go buy books in bookshops around the world, enjoy the business. And those are the places that I buy books from. So I hope and wish everybody success in book hunting. And of course, as I said, reach out to me with any questions, or if you want any valuations. I'm always happy to help people. I'm always happy to buy books from people too. So thank you so much for watching.